My brother, Jake, had the guts to call me a pathetic yard grunt right to my face, then banned me from his lavish birthday party after I'd spent 6 long years pouring my heart, soul, and over $300,000 into getting him through law school. I was still processing that slap in the face when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Sarah, don't come to Jake's birthday this year. It's better for him this way." Better for him? My brother, the same guy I'd kept afloat through every semester, the same guy who'd still be stuck in some dead-end job without me footing his bills. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, hoping I'd misread it. Maybe it was a typo, a cruel joke. But then another message landed. "Emily's family will be there, you know. They're a different crowd. We just don't want any weird vibes." My stomach sank like a stone. A different crowd. I knew what that meant. Emily came from a line of hotshot lawyers and judges, people who probably had courtrooms named after them. And me? I ran a landscaping business. Not the woman who'd clawed her way up from nothing to build a thriving company. Not the sister who'd sacrificed everything to give Jake his shot. No, to them, I was just the hired help, the chick who mowed lawns. It wasn't just about missing a party. They were wiping me out of the picture, hiding me like some shameful smudge on their pristine reputation. And the worst part? Jake was all in on it. I put my coffee down on the counter, my hands oddly steady in a way that almost unnerved me. I should have been furious, tearing into them with every ounce of anger I had bottled up, demanding they explain themselves. But I wasn't. Instead, this icy calm settled over me, sharp and clear. They thought they could toss me aside like yesterday's trash? Fine. Let's see how they swim when I pull the plug. Looking back, the red flags were there, waving in my face if I'd bothered to notice. Little moments that piled up over time. Jake dodging my calls like I was a telemarketer. His tone shifting from warm and thankful to clipped and distant. The way he'd flood Instagram with posts about his relentless climb to becoming a lawyer, but never once dropped my name. I ignored it all because I loved him, because I'd convinced myself family meant giving everything, no questions asked. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first real kick to the gut came at Easter, just a month before this birthday betrayal. I'd been grinding through a brutal 60-hour week, hauling myself to family dinner straight from a job site, still in my work clothes, khaki pants, a crisp navy polo with my company logo stitched on it, the kind of outfit I wore when pitching to upscale clients like country clubs and gated estates. Jake, though? He strutted in like he owned the place. Tailored gray suit, gleaming leather loafers, swinging a monogrammed briefcase that screamed money. Money he sure as hell didn't have on a law student's budget. I hadn't even grabbed a plate when my loudmouth uncle clapped him on the back with a grin. "Jake, my boy, tell us about law school. Word is you're tearing it up out there." "Oh, it's going fantastic," Jake said, flashing that polished courtroom-ready smile he'd spent years perfecting. "It's a grind, no doubt, but I'm making it work." Making it work. I'd shelled out over $300,000. Tuition, textbooks, rent, you name it, covering every dime his partial scholarships didn't touch. I'd skipped trips with friends, new boots, date nights, anything resembling a life, just so he could bury his nose in law books without a care. But he didn't breathe a word of that. Not once did he say, "Sarah's the reason I'm here." The conversation at the table rolled on, everyone fawning over Jake's golden future, gushing about how fortunate he was to be on this path. I sat there, picking at my food, waiting for someone, anyone, to turn to me and say, "Sarah, you're a damn hero for carrying him this far." Nothing, zilch. Instead, Mom swiveled to me with this tight, awkward smile. So, how's your little lawn business going, sweetie? My little lawn business, like it was some weekend side hustle, not a company with 70 employees I'd built from the dirt up with my own 2 hands. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a grin. It's solid. We just scored contracts with 3 golf courses and a big HOA. Oh, that's nice, she said, her voice flat, barely registering what I'd said before pivoting back to Jake. You know, hon, once you pass the bar, you should talk to Emily's dad about joining his firm. That'd be such a perfect fit. And just like that, I was erased from the room again, like I'd never even spoken. When Emily waltzed into Jake's life, things took a nosedive fast. I was genuinely happy for him at first. She was bright, charming, a law student with a killer resume. A good match, I thought. But then the shift happened. Suddenly, Jake was too swamped to grab coffee with me, too tied up to return a text, too preoccupied to even acknowledge I existed. The lowest blow came when I ran into them by pure chance. I'd just finished a long day negotiating with a client at an upscale golf resort, stepping out into the parking lot with my clipboard still in hand. Across the way, I spotted them, Jake and Emily, laughing together near his car, her hand tucked into his arm, looking like some picture-perfect legal dream team. I started to wave, a smile creeping up, but then I saw it. The exact moment Jake clocked me. His face went from carefree to sheer panic in a heartbeat. He grabbed Emily's elbow and hustled her into the car so fast you'd think I was about to serve him a subpoena. I froze, my hand still half raised, the sting sinking in. Did he just pretend he didn't see me? It was humiliating, a punch to the chest. I tried to shake it off, told myself he was just distracted, but I knew deep down something was seriously wrong. Then came Mom's call, the final nail in the coffin, proving I was nothing but a nuisance to them now. I dialed Jake right after, my pulse racing. No answer. So I texted, "Did you tell Mom to kick me out of your birthday plans?" The typing dots flickered, vanished, flickered again. Then, finally, "It's complicated, Sarah." You wouldn't get it. Wouldn't get it? The kid I'd stayed up with during thunderstorms when we were little, the guy I'd scraped by for so he could chase his dreams, he thought I wouldn't get it? I gripped my phone so hard I thought the screen might crack. I could have lost it right there. Called him up screaming, demanded he face every single thing I'd done for him, but I didn't. I took a slow, deep breath, set the phone down on my desk, and pulled my laptop closer. I had a plan brewing now, and Jake didn't have the faintest idea what was about to hit him. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed, eyes locked on the ceiling, my brain replaying every betrayal like a broken record I couldn't shut off. The way Jake had brushed me off like I was nothing. The way Mom had casually axed me from his birthday, as if I were a blemish on their family portrait. The way Jake had hidden me like I was some embarrassing footnote he didn't want anyone to read. For 6 years, I'd been his rock. Every tuition payment wired on time, every rent check mailed without fail, every desperate call when he'd blown his budget on God knows what. I'd worked 14-hour days, hauled myself to meetings with sunburned shoulders and calloused hands, kept my crew paid and my business growing. I wasn't just his sister. I'd been his lifeline, his golden ticket. And he thought he could cut me loose now that I didn't fit their shiny new image, that he could climb to the top on my sacrifices and act like I'd never existed? No chance in hell. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. If Jake and my parents wanted me out, if they wanted to pretend I was just some lowly gardener, so be it. But they were about to find out what happens when you burn the bridge that's been holding you up. I was done. Done giving, done fixing, done caring. By the time the sun peeked through my blinds, I had my laptop open, diving into my finances with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Jake had been coasting, too comfortable, because I'd made it all too easy for him. He didn't check his tuition balances, didn't sweat his rent, didn't have a clue how much of my money flowed into his cushy little life. That was about to change, and it was going to change fast. Step 1. I logged into my bank and canceled every scheduled tuition payment for his next semester. Step 2. I called the loan office and withdrew myself as the cosigner on his student loans, my voice steady as I confirmed it over the phone. Step 3. I cut off the monthly stipend I'd been sending him for rent, groceries, whatever else he blew it on, gone with a few clicks. It took less than an hour to dismantle the safety net I'd spent years weaving around him. I could already see it playing out in my head. Jake logging into his student portal, staring at an unpaid balance, firing off a frantic email to the registrar's office, realizing his enrollment was hanging by a thread. I wanted him to feel it. All of it. The weight of responsibility crashing down. The gut-wrenching panic of not knowing if he could keep his spot. The exact same stress I'd carried on my shoulders for years to keep him afloat. Except this time, I wasn't carrying it for him. It was his mess now. Jake had built this whole persona around being the self-made law school prodigy, the guy who'd clawed his way up through sheer grit and brilliance. What a load of crap. I'd been his bank account, his cushion, his silent partner in every success he bragged about. I'd paved his road, and I was through letting him take all the credit while I faded into the background. I didn't need some loud, messy showdown to get even. I just needed the truth to hit him where it hurt. So I opened up Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, every platform where Jake paraded his flawless, curated life, and I typed, "Big milestone today. My company, Greenhaven Landscaping, is celebrating 9 years strong. I started with nothing but a mower and a dream, and now we're a crew of over 70, keeping neighborhoods green. This business didn't just support me, it held up my family. It's why my brother Jake could chase law school without a mountain of debt. Every sweaty day, every extra contract I hustled for, it was worth it to see him succeed. Here's to your next steps, Jake." I hit post. No venom, no finger-pointing, just the cold, hard facts. The blowback was immediate, like tossing a match into dry grass. The first comment popped up in minutes. "Wait, Sarah, you paid for Jake's law school? I thought he was all scholarships." Then another, "Jake never mentioned this. You're a legend, Sarah." And then, "Hold up, so Jake's big lawyer act is running on your cash?" I leaned back in my chair with a small, satisfied smile. Let the world connect the dots. Let Jake sweat it out, explaining why he'd buried the sister who'd bankrolled his entire dream. I didn't have to wait long for the chaos to start. The first call came at noon. Jake. I let it ring out, watching the screen light up and fade. An hour later, Mom. I swiped it away. By the third call, Jake left a voicemail, his voice shaky and pleading. "Sarah, I don't know what's happening, but I just got an alert from school. My tuition isn't paid. I thought maybe it's a mistake. Please call me back." I didn't. By nightfall, the texts started pouring in like a flood I couldn't stop. Jake. "Sarah, I'm freaking out here. We need to talk." Then, "Why isn't my tuition covered?" Then, "Mom said you posted something online. What the hell is this?" And finally, "Sarah, this isn't funny. You've got to fix this." There it was. The same old entitlement. The assumption I'd swoop in and save his ass like always. He still didn't get it. Not even close. So I typed one reply, short and sharp. "I'm done cleaning up after you." Sent. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Then, "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't bother answering. I didn't need to. The next morning, I checked my email, and there it was, right on schedule. Jake's university had sent him a final notice about his unpaid tuition. He had 10 days to cough up the cash, or he was out on his ass. I wondered how he'd pull that off without me. By the end of the week, he was in full-on damage control mode, flailing like a fish out of water. He threw up this over-the-top, melodramatic Instagram post. "Law school's a battlefield, but real passion makes every fight worth it." Not a peep about whose passion had kept him in the game. He called up cousins, spinning some flimsy story about a bank screw-up to explain the tuition mess. Then he made the dumbest move of all. He rang Emily's family, begging for a handout. It blew up in his face, and it was glorious. Turns out Emily's dad, the big-shot lawyer Jake had been schmoozing, had started out cutting grass as a teenager, just like me. When Emily got wind of how Jake had sidelined me, how he'd been too ashamed to admit his sister's grind had built his success, she dumped him cold. She did it loud and public, right before his precious birthday bash. Suddenly, Jake wasn't just scrambling for cash. He was watching his reputation, his relationship, his whole shiny future crumble to dust. And me? I just sat back and watched the show. For the first time in years, it wasn't my problem to fix. After Emily walked out, Jake didn't wise up. He doubled down. I don't know if it was panic or pride or just plain stupidity, but instead of owning his mess, he did what he always did, tried to dodge the fallout. He called Mom and Dad, not to apologize or admit he'd screwed up royally. No, he called to turn them against me. It started with a text from Mom. "Sarah, what's wrong with you? Jake's in deep trouble, and you just abandoned him like this." I barely had time to scoff before another one rolled in. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I let out a bitter laugh. Everything they'd done for me? Like what? Dismissing my business as some cute little yard gig, acting like Jake's wins were all his own, kicking me out of his birthday plans because I didn't fit their fancy new circle? They weren't upset because Jake was struggling. They were pissed because, for once, I wasn't there to mop up the mess they'd all made. I didn't respond, didn't even dignify it with a word. Then Jake took his shot, starting soft like he thought he could play me. "Sarah, can we just talk?" I ignored it, let it sit unread. A few hours later, he tried again. "I know you're mad, but this is my future on the line here. Please don't let your anger ruin everything I've worked for." Everything he'd worked for? The nerve of that almost made me chuck my phone across the room. But he wasn't done. "I'll pay you back, I swear. I just need some time. You wouldn't want me to lose it all over a misunderstanding, right?" A misunderstanding? There was no misunderstanding here. Jake had made it crystal clear where I stood the second he let Mom cut me out. The second he started treating me like some dirty secret he couldn't let Emily's family see. By the end of the week, he'd convinced himself he could still sweet-talk me into bailing him out. It was almost pathetic watching him flounder. First, he tried gaslighting. "Sarah, come on! It's not what you think. You know I'm grateful for everything you've done." "Oh, really?" Because I hadn't heard a shred of gratitude until he needed me to save his skin again. Then he flipped to victim mode. "Do you have any idea how brutal law school is? I can't work a job right now. If I get dropped, all these years are down the drain." Funny how time and money were suddenly big deals to him now, when they never mattered while he was blowing my cash on tailored suits and weekend trips with Emily. When that didn't work, he went for threats. "You're making a massive mistake here. You're tearing this family apart." I laughed out loud at that one, a sharp, hollow sound. tearing the family apart, because I wouldn't keep funding his charade, because I was done letting him pretend I didn't exist while he reaped the rewards of my work? No, Jake. I wasn't the one breaking anything. I was just letting them feel what life was like without me holding it all together. The thing about Jake, he thrived on being the golden child, the charming, driven future lawyer who'd pulled himself up by his bootstraps. And now that lie was unraveling in front of everyone. The comments under my social media post kept coming, each one a little dagger. Wow, Jake never told us Sarah paid his way. That's messed up. Kind of makes you wonder what else he's been faking. Sarah, you're the real MVP. Jake should be kissing your feet. And my favorite. So Jake's been strutting around on his sister's dime? That's embarrassing. He must have seen them, because 2 days later, he tried to rewrite the script. A new post popped up on his Instagram. Success isn't about where you start, it's about where you end up. I've faced my share of battles, but I've always pushed through. Hard work wins every time. The caption oozed self-righteous nonsense, not a whisper of me or how he'd gotten there. Just vague, dramatic fluff to cast himself as the underdog hero. The comments weren't buying it. Hard work? Didn't Sarah bankroll your degree? Pushed through? More like Sarah carried you. Dude, just thank your sister and quit the act. It was beautiful chaos. But Jake still didn't catch on. He thought he could outrun the truth. His real collapse came a week later. I got a call from Emily, her voice tight. Sarah, have you seen the guest list for the law firm's networking gala next week? I hadn't. Jake's speaking there, she said, sounding almost apologetic. He's pitched himself as some rags to riches inspiration, talking about overcoming the odds to make it through law school. I stared at my phone, dumbfounded. He was seriously about to stand up in front of a room packed with attorneys and donors and spin a fairy tale about his struggle? I almost wanted to let him crash and burn on his own, just to see how far he'd take the lie. But then I realized I could do better. I could make sure the right people were there to hear it. So I started making calls, dozens of them, pulling strings I didn't even know I had. By the time Jake stepped onto that stage, the crowd wasn't just random suits. It was full of folks who knew the real story. He launched into his speech, waxing poetic about how hard work had gotten him through law school, how he'd scraped by to chase his dream. Someone in the audience let out a loud, barking laugh. Then another joined in. Then a voice rang out, sharp and dripping with sarcasm. Was that before or after your sister paid for everything? The room went dead silent. Jake froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color, his mouth flapping uselessly as he tried to recover. Too late. He'd spent years building this perfect image, and in one brutal moment, it all came crashing down around him. That night, he called me. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me do it. I wanted to hear him squirm. When I answered, his voice was low, broken. Sarah, I screwed up bad. Yeah, Jake, you did. For the first time, I didn't feel the anger or the hurt, just a quiet, final sense of being done. I don't know how to fix this, he said, almost whispering. I didn't hesitate. Then maybe it's time you figure it out on your own. I hung up, let out a slow breath, and watched his name vanish from my screen. That was it. No more safety net, no more big sister riding in to save the day. He was alone, and the best part? He'd brought it all on himself. The gala disaster spread like wildfire. People couldn't stop talking, lawyers, donors, firm partners, you name it. It didn't take long for the truth to seep into every corner. One of Emily's law school buddies, a guy I'd never met, emailed me the next day. Sarah, I don't know if you heard, but Jake's speech was a total train wreck. Thought you'd want to know a bunch of firm higher-ups were there. They're not impressed. Words going around his clerkship prospects just took a nosedive. A nosedive. Jake had spent years crafting this flawless persona, the scrappy, brilliant future lawyer headed for the top. That speech was supposed to seal the deal, lock in his shot at elite clerkships. Instead, he'd humiliated himself in front of the very people who could have made his career. I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. 2 days later, the text started up again. Jake. Sarah, please, I need to talk. I ignored it. Then, firms are dropping me left and right. Rejections or radio silence. There it was. His golden boy shine, tarnished beyond repair. Once people saw he was a fraud riding on someone else's back, no one wanted to touch him. And his money situation? Even worse. He'd been living large on my dime, never saving a cent. Tuition unpaid, rent overdue, credit cards maxed out from his flashy suits, and getaways with Emily. With no cash, no backup, and no one left to con, he did the only thing he could. He slunk back to Mom and Dad. I got the scoop from my aunt, because of course my parents wouldn't dare tell me themselves. Apparently, Jake showed up at their doorstep expecting a warm welcome, arms open to bail him out. Didn't happen. Instead, Dad, who used to crow about our lawyer son to anyone with ears, lost it. My aunt said he laid into Jake. You've humiliated this family. You let Sarah carry you, then tried to erase her, and now you think we're your cleanup crew? Mom wasn't much kinder. Do you know how embarrassing this is? We vouched for you, and now everyone knows you're a liar. For the first time ever, Jake had to face the music, and he couldn't handle the tune. It took a full week before he did what I'd been waiting for. He showed up at my office. I was wrapping up a day of reviewing bids for a new park project when my assistant poked her head in. Sarah, your brother's here. He looks like hell. I sighed and glanced at the security feed. There he was, standing outside, unshaven, bleary-eyed, wearing the same rumpled dress shirt he'd probably had on for days. I let him stew out there for a good 20 minutes before I walked out. When I finally approached, he looked up at me like I was his last lifeline. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. For what, exactly? He swallowed hard, his voice rough. For everything. I was a selfish jerk. I took you for granted. I don't know what to do now. I tilted my head, studying him. So what? You want me to fix it for you? His face twisted with shame, but I could still see that flicker of hope in his eyes, like he thought if he groveled just right, I'd cave. Jake, I said, cutting through the silence, let me make this real clear. You're not getting another penny from me. His eyes widened, a flash of panic. I wasn't asking for money, No, I interrupted, my voice firm. No job leads, no connections, no help of any kind. You're on your own to dig out of this hole. He looked like I'd punched him in the gut. Then, for the first time, something clicked. He nodded slowly, shoulders slumping. I get it, he muttered, barely audible. I nodded back. Good. Then, because I wanted him to really feel the weight of it, I stepped closer. This is what it's like when the people you depend on turn their backs. He closed his eyes, his face crumpling with regret, and I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone. Over the next few months, bits and pieces about Jake trickled back to me through the grapevine. He'd picked up a gig bussing tables at some diner, a far cry from the slick lawyer life he'd pictured for himself. He'd taken out loans to cover the rest of his tuition, drowning himself in debt he'd never bothered preparing for. Emily never looked back, and I didn't blame her. Meanwhile, My life took off in ways I hadn't let myself imagine. My business exploded. New contracts with resorts, new hires, new respect from people who'd once overlooked me. I finally cut the cord on my family's expectations, letting go of that need to prove myself to them. Then, months later, one last text from Jake popped up. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to say thank you. Not just for what you did back then, but for this now. I needed this wake-up call, and I'm learning it the hard way." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I didn't write back. Some things didn't need words. He'd finally seen the truth, and for once, it wasn't my burden to carry. That message from Jake sat unread on my phone for days. I'd spent years propping him up, sorting out his chaos, shoving my own needs aside so he could shine. And now, after he'd used me, erased me, humiliated me, he finally got it. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd moved on. For the first time, I was living for myself. No more jumping at every buzz of my phone, expecting some crisis from Jake. No more juggling my budget to cover his rent, his tuition, his reckless spending. No more chasing approval from a family that never gave it. I realized I'd never needed it to begin with. I'd built Green Haven from nothing, turned it into something real, something mine, and now I could finally enjoy it. I booked my first real vacation in years. Not some quick weekend escape or a work trip, but a legit getaway. Somewhere with sun, sand, and silence, far from the noise of my old life. Sitting by the ocean, the warm breeze on my face, it hit me. I'd won. Not in some petty, spiteful way, not to rub it in anyone's face, but in the way that actually counted. I'd risen above it all. Back home, things weren't so rosy for Mom, Dad, or Jake. His fall from grace had smashed their perfect little narrative to pieces. The son they'd banked all their pride on wasn't their golden ticket anymore, just a broke law student buried in debt. Without me there to patch it all up, their world was unraveling. I heard through my cousins that Dad had stopped name-dropping Jake at his golf games, that Mom started dodging questions about how he was doing with vague excuses. For the first time, they had to face what I'd done for them all those years. Not that they ever said it to my face, but that was fine. Their acknowledgement wasn't something I craved anymore. Months rolled by, and Jake hit rock bottom. The diner job barely kept him afloat. He had to ditch his fancy downtown apartment, hawk his designer suits, figure out how to stretch $1. I didn't check in, didn't offer a hand, didn't feel the urge to. It wasn't my job anymore. Eventually, he clawed his way up a bit, snagged a scholarship, started tutoring rich kids prepping for the LSAT, actually worked for what he'd once expected me to hand him. For the first time, he stood on his own 2 feet. It was almost funny in a twisted way. He'd spent so long thinking my job made me less. Some dirty-handed landscaper next to his suit and tie ambitions. But it took losing it all for him to see what real work looked like, what it meant to hustle without a net. The next year, a birthday invite for Jake showed up in my mailbox. Not a guilt trip call or a desperate text, but an actual card, handwritten. I turned it over in my hands for a while, tracing the ink with my finger. Then I tossed it in the trash without a second thought. I didn't need to go back there. That part of my life was done, sealed shut. I'd spent too many years begging for a place at a table that never valued me. Now I had my own table, built from the ground up, and I wasn't about to shrink myself down to fit theirs again. There was a time I thought family meant blind loyalty, that you had to keep pouring yourself out, keep sacrificing, keep showing up no matter how they treated you. But I've learned the hard way that loyalty's a two-way street. respect has to go both ways. And the second someone starts seeing you as disposable, as just a rung on their ladder to the top, that's when you walk away and don't look back. So, what about you? Ever had to cut loose someone who took you for granted? What was the breaking point that made you say, enough? Drop it in the comments. I'm all ears for your story.